It was a cold morning in early spring. The lake was still. No wind. No waves. No noise. Just silence. The kind of silence that makes you feel safe. I was standing on my dock, holding a cup of cheap coffee, watching the sun rise. That was my routine. Every Friday morning. Work all week. Escape on weekends. This island was my escape. My reset button. My therapy. My second home. I bought it 15 years ago. Back when nobody wanted land out here. Back when people laughed at me. You bought a rock in the water? What are you going to do there? Live with fish? But I saw something they didn't. Peace. Freedom. Space. A place where nobody could touch me. Or so I thought. That morning, I noticed something strange. A sound. Far away. Like metal hitting metal. Clang, clang, clang. At first, I ignored it. Maybe someone fishing. Maybe maintenance. Maybe wind. But the sound kept coming. Closer. Louder. More aggressive. So I picked up my binoculars. And that's when I saw them. Boats. Big boats. Work boats. Loaded with wood. Steel. Concrete. Men wearing helmets. Yellow vests. Tools. Machinery. Coming toward my island. My heart slowed down. Then sped up. Then dropped. Because nobody was supposed to be there. Nobody. This must be a mistake. I jumped into my small motorboat and headed toward them. The closer I got, the worse it looked. They had already tied ropes to my trees. My trees. They were unloading equipment. Setting up platforms. Hammering stakes into my ground. My ground. I shouted before I even reached them. Hey! Hey! What are you doing? One of the workers looked at me. Didn't seem scared. Didn't seem surprised. Didn't even seem concerned. He just said calmly. Construction. I said, construction? On whose land? He pointed at the island. Here. I said, this is mine. He shrugged. We have permits. That sentence. We have permits. It sounded so simple. So confident. So final. Like a door closing. I said, show me. He called his supervisor. A tall man with a tablet in his hand. He pulled up documents. Maps. Stamps. Signatures. Everything looked official. Everything looked real. And none of it had my name on it. The first punch in the stomach. I remember standing there, reading those papers. My hands were shaking. My mouth was dry. My brain felt slow. Like it couldn't process what was happening. This was my island. I had deeds. Titles. Tax receipts. Insurance. Everything. And yet, here were strangers. With permission. To build on it. I called my lawyer immediately. He said, don't worry. Probably a mistake. I called the county office. They said, we'll look into it. I called the HOA. No answer. I emailed. No reply. I drove to their office. Closed. Meanwhile, the workers kept working. Hammering. Drilling. Cutting. Destroying. It felt like watching someone rob your house. While police stand next to them. And say nothing. That night, I didn't sleep. I kept replaying everything in my head. How? Why? Who? When? What did I miss? Did someone forge something? Did I sign something I forgot? Was I stupid? Was I careless? Was I about to lose everything? I walked around my cabin at 3 a.m., looking at the walls, the photos, the furniture, the memories, thinking, am I about to lose this place? I felt small, powerless, like a poor man standing in front of a tank. 2 days later, I finally got a reply. From the HOA. One short email. Cold. Professional. Emotionless. It said, your island is part of our approved development zone. Construction is authorized. Please do not interfere. That was it. No greeting. No explanation. No apology. Just a warning. Like I was the problem. Not them. I printed that email. Put it on my table. And stared at it for an hour. Something wasn't right. And deep inside, I knew. This was only the beginning. Because 1 week later, when I returned to my island, I saw something that made my knees weak. Foundations. Concrete slabs. Permanent structures. Not temporary. Not small. Not test projects. They were building real cabins. Luxury cabins. And they weren't planning to stop. They were planning to take over everything. And I was standing there. Alone. Watching it happen. I stood there on the edge of my dock, staring at those concrete slabs like they were gravestones. Each one felt like a mark on my life, a reminder that something I loved was being taken away piece by piece, right in front of my eyes. The sound of drills echoed across the water, bouncing off the trees and coming back to me like mockery. Every hammer strike felt personal. Every truckload of material felt like another inch of my land disappearing. And yet, everyone around me acted like this was normal. Like I was just some annoying neighbor complaining about noise. For the next few weeks, I lived in a state of constant anger. I woke up angry. I worked angry. I drove to the lake angry. I went to sleep angry. I argued with customer service. I snapped at friends. I barely ate. My mind was stuck on one question: how could this happen without me knowing? I had never missed a tax payment. I had never ignored a notice. I had never signed anything suspicious. My paperwork was clean. My ownership was clear. So why was the system suddenly acting like I didn't exist? I hired a new lawyer, then another one. Each meeting felt the same. They leaned back in their chairs, adjusted their glasses, and said words that sounded polite but meant nothing. This is complicated. HOAs have strong legal power. It might take years. It could be expensive. One of them even said, sometimes it's better to negotiate and accept compensation. Accept compensation. For my own land. That sentence made me want to flip the table. But I didn't. I nodded. I listened. And I walked out feeling more alone than before. Meanwhile, construction moved faster. Walls went up. Roofs appeared. Windows were installed. Paths were carved through my trees. Power lines were stretched. Water pipes were buried. My island was being transformed into something I didn't recognize. It was like watching someone repaint your childhood home while you're still living in it. Every visit hurt more than the last. Some days, I stayed in my boat and didn't even step on land, because I couldn't bear to see what was happening. One afternoon, I tried to talk directly to the HOA president. His name was Richard. Tall. Gray hair. Perfect smile. The kind of man who always looked like he was in control. I waited outside their office for 2 hours. When he finally came out, I introduced myself. I told him calmly that the island was mine. I told him I had proof. I told him this was wrong. He listened politely. Then he smiled and said, "We've reviewed everything. Our lawyers are confident. You're mistaken." And then he walked away. Just like that. Like I was invisible. That was the moment something changed inside me. Up until then, I had been emotional. Angry. Hurt. Confused. But after that conversation, a strange calm came over me. I realized something important. They were not scared. Which meant they believed they were safe. Which meant they believed they had covered their tracks. And people only feel that confident when they think nobody is watching closely. So I started watching. I bought a notebook. A thick one. Black cover. No design. Just pages. On the first page, I wrote one sentence. Everything matters. And from that day on, I treated this situation like a long-term mission. Every time I visited the island, I took photos. From different angles. From different distances. Morning. Evening. Rain. Sunday. I recorded videos of workers arriving. Of trucks unloading. Of materials being stored. I wrote down dates. Times. License plates. Company names on uniforms. I started using a small drone to get aerial footage. Nothing illegal. Nothing secret. Just observation. At night, instead of watching TV, I read. I read zoning laws. I read property codes. I read HOA regulations. I read court cases. I learned words I had never cared about before. Easements. Encroachments. Adverse possession. Riparian rights. Development overlays. At first, it felt overwhelming. Like learning a new language at 40 years old. But slowly, patterns appeared. Connections formed. I began to understand how the system worked. And more importantly, how it was abused. I went to the county records office and spent entire weekends there. Old files. Dusty folders. Microfilm. Scanned PDFs. I searched for anything connected to my island. Any agreement. Any permit. Any reference. Most days, I found nothing useful. But I kept going. Because I knew something had to be there. A mistake. A shortcut. A lie. Something. Friends noticed the change in me. I stopped going out. I stopped talking about anything else. When they asked how I was doing, I just said, working on something. Some thought I was obsessed. Maybe I was. But when someone threatens to take a piece of your soul, obsession becomes survival. Months passed. Then a year. Then almost 2. The cabins were nearly finished. People started renting them. Tourists arrived with suitcases and cameras, laughing and smiling, completely unaware that they were sleeping on stolen land. Sometimes, I sat on my porch at night and listened to their voices across the water. Music. Laughter. Fire pits. Life going on. On my island. Without me. And still, I said nothing. Because deep down, I knew something they didn't. Every empire falls the same way. Not with noise. With paperwork. By the time the second year ended, my life had become 2 separate worlds. During the day, I was just another man going to work, paying bills, smiling politely at coworkers, pretending everything was fine. But at night, and on weekends, I lived inside files, maps, records, and legal language. My dining table was no longer a place for meals. It was covered with folders, sticky notes, printed emails, and highlighted documents. My phone memory was full of photos of dirt, trees, concrete, and license plates. My laptop was filled with folders named by dates and locations. If someone had walked into my house back then, they would have thought I was planning a crime. In reality, I was preparing to prove one. Most nights, I fell asleep with papers on my chest. Sometimes I dreamed about courtrooms. Other times, I dreamed that I woke up and the island was gone, replaced by a parking lot. I would wake up sweating, heart racing, and immediately grab my phone to check my photos, just to remind myself that it was still there. Still mine. At least on paper. One rainy Saturday afternoon, I went back to the county archive office. It was almost empty. The kind of day when even the employees looked bored and tired. A woman behind the desk recognized me by then. She didn't even ask why I was there anymore. She just handed me a visitor badge and nodded toward the back. I took my usual seat and started scrolling through scanned records from 15 years ago, then 20, then 30. Hours passed. Click. Scroll. Zoom. Read. Repeat. My eyes burned. My back hurt. My coffee was cold. I was about to give up and leave when I noticed something strange. A file name that didn't match the others. Most documents had clear labels. Deeds. Transfers. Surveys. But this one was vague. Temporary Access Agreement, Lakeside Project. I clicked it. At first, it looked boring. Standard language. Legal phrases. Nothing dramatic. But then I saw the date. It was signed 3 years before I bought the island. By the previous owner. My heart skipped. I leaned closer to the screen. The agreement allowed limited access to part of the shoreline for survey and environmental assessment purposes only. It clearly stated that no permanent structures could be built. No foundations. No housing. No commercial use. It also had an expiration date. 5 years after signing. That date had passed. 10 years ago. I stared at the screen for a long time. Then I started shaking. Because the HOA's entire project was built on this one document. A document that didn't apply anymore. A document that didn't belong to me. A document they had no right to use. And worse. In their permit applications, they had referenced it as if it were still valid. As if time didn't exist. As if ownership never changed. As if I wasn't real. That wasn't a mistake. That was manipulation. I printed everything. 3 copies. 1 for home. 1 for my lawyer. 1 for backup. On the drive back, my hands were gripping the steering wheel so hard they hurt. My mind was racing. Every conversation I had replayed in my head. Every confident smile. Every "we have permits." Every "our lawyers reviewed it." They knew. Or at least, someone knew. And they hoped nobody would ever look this deep. That night, I didn't sleep at all. I sat at my desk, connecting pieces like a puzzle. The agreement. The permits. The construction timeline. The HOA board elections. The development loans. Slowly, a picture formed. The HOA had rushed this project to secure funding. They needed proof of access and rights. Instead of negotiating with me, they took a shortcut. They used an old document and stretched it beyond recognition. And once construction started, they counted on momentum to protect them. Because stopping a finished project is much harder than stopping a planned one. It was like watching someone build a house on quicksand and hoping nobody noticed. The next week, I met my 3rd lawyer. His name was Daniel. Quiet. Sharp eyes. Didn't talk much. I brought a suitcase of documents. Literally. When I placed it on his desk, he raised his eyebrows. He flipped through pages slowly, carefully, like a doctor reading test results. After 2 hours, he leaned back. And for the first time in 2 years, someone said the words I needed to hear. "You have a case." Not maybe. Not "it's complicated." Not "we'll see." "You have a case." But he wasn't smiling. He said, "It's strong. But it's dangerous." I asked what he meant. He said, "They're deep in. Millions invested. Powerful lawyers. Political connections. If you go after them, they will fight dirty. They will delay. They will attack your credibility. They will try to exhaust you." I looked at him and said, "I've been exhausted for 2 years." He nodded. Then he said, All right. Then let's do this properly. From that day on, everything changed. We stopped reacting. We started planning. We organized evidence into timelines. We cross-referenced permits with ownership records. We compared maps. We found inconsistencies. Missing signatures. Wrong coordinates. Backdated approvals. Things most people would never notice. But courts notice. Weeks turned into months. Behind the scenes, we were building a legal weapon. And the HOA had no idea. They were busy celebrating. Their cabins were fully booked. Their profits were rising. Their confidence was growing. They thought they had won. They didn't know. The clock had started. By the time Daniel and I were ready, nearly 3 years had passed since the first hammer touched my island. 3 years of watching. 3 years of collecting. 3 years of swallowing my anger and turning it into evidence. The cabins were no longer under construction. They were alive. Smoke rose from chimneys. Lights glowed at night. Kayaks floated near docks. Tourists posted pictures online, smiling in front of buildings that didn't belong to the people who rented them. Sometimes I searched the location on social media. I saw captions like, "Perfect getaway," and "Hidden paradise," and "Best vacation ever." I never commented. I never corrected anyone. I just saved the posts. Date. Time. Proof of commercial use. Another brick in my case. Daniel told me something that stuck in my mind. Timing matters more than anger. If I had sued in the first month, they would have claimed confusion. If I had sued in the first year, they would have claimed misunderstanding. But now, after 3 years of profits, rentals, and expansion, there was no excuse left. They had crossed every legal line. So one quiet Tuesday morning, Daniel filed the lawsuit. No announcement. No warning. No drama. Just paperwork. Filed in county court. Stamped. Recorded. Real. That same afternoon, I got my first call. It was from an unknown number. I answered. A man's voice said, "Is this Mr. Carter?" "Yes. This is legal counsel for Lakeside HOA. We need to discuss your recent filing." His tone was polite. Too polite. Like someone trying not to panic. I said, "You can speak to my lawyer." He paused. Then said, "We were hoping to resolve this amicably." I smiled. 3 years too late. Within days, everything changed. Letters arrived. Emails. Phone calls. Formal notices. Informal warnings. Suddenly, everyone wanted to talk. The same people who had ignored me for years now acted like we were old friends. Richard, the HOA president, even invited me to coffee. I declined. Daniel warned me, they'll try charm first. Then pressure. Then fear. He was right. When charm failed, pressure started. They claimed I had accepted the development by staying silent. They said my visits meant approval. They argued that time had erased my rights. They accused me of acting in bad faith. One letter even suggested I was trying to extort them. That one made me laugh. But underneath the laughter, I felt fear. Because they weren't playing anymore. They were fighting. Court hearings began. Small ones at first. Procedural. Scheduling. Motions. Arguments about arguments. Lawyers love delaying things. Every month they delayed was another month of profit for them. Another month of exhaustion for me. I took days off work. I spent savings. I canceled vacations. I sold my second car. People asked why I didn't just settle. Why not take money and walk away? Because it wasn't about money anymore. It was about dignity. They had erased me. Pretended I didn't exist. I refused to accept that. The first major hearing was packed. HOA members, developers, lawyers, observers. I sat next to Daniel, wearing the only suit I owned. My hands were sweaty. My throat was dry. When the judge entered, everyone stood. She was older. Gray hair. Sharp eyes. No nonsense. She listened quietly as both sides spoke. The HOA's lawyers were smooth. Confident. They talked about community growth. Economic benefits. Tourism. Jobs. They painted me as a stubborn man blocking progress. Then Daniel stood up. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't dramatize. He just showed documents. Dates. Maps. Signatures. He showed how the access agreement had expired. How ownership had changed. How permits referenced outdated records. How my name was missing everywhere. He spoke like someone telling a simple truth. And I saw something in the judge's face. Curiosity. That's when I knew. We had her attention. After that hearing, things escalated. The court ordered discovery. That meant both sides had to share internal documents. Emails. Memos. Financial records. Internal approvals. That's when the real story started coming out. Daniel called me one night, excited. I think we found something. An internal email chain. Between HOA board members and developers. From years ago. One message said, the island owner hasn't responded. We'll proceed using old access paperwork. Another replied, risky, but if we move fast, it'll be too late to stop. I read that message 20 times. They knew. They knew. They built anyway. That wasn't a misunderstanding. That was a calculated gamble. And they bet on me being weak. Depositions followed. People were questioned under oath. Former board members. Construction managers. Permit officers. Some were nervous. Some were arrogant. Some contradicted themselves. One man said he never saw the old agreement. Then later admitted he referenced it. Another claimed he believed I had approved. Then couldn't show any proof. Every lie created cracks. Every crack widened. Meanwhile, rumors spread. Some cabin owners heard about the lawsuit. Bookings dropped. Investors got nervous. Banks started asking questions. The pressure turned inward. I could feel it. They were losing confidence. One evening, as I sat on my porch, watching the lights across the lake, I realized something. For the first time in years. They were afraid. And I was calm. By the time the main trial began, the atmosphere around the lake had completely changed. What was once a proud, booming vacation spot now felt tense and fragile, like a glass house full of cracks. The cabins were still standing. Tourists were still arriving. Boats were still moving across the water. But beneath the surface, fear had replaced confidence. Every handshake felt forced. Every smile looked rehearsed. Everyone knew something big was coming, and nobody knew how bad it would be. On the first day of trial, I arrived early. The courtroom was cold. Not just in temperature, but in feeling. Wooden benches. Pale walls. Harsh lights. No comfort anywhere. I sat quietly, watching people enter. Developers in expensive suits. HOA board members whispering to each other. Lawyers carrying heavy briefcases. Reporters with notebooks. Even a few cabin owners showed up, curiosity written on their faces. They wanted to know if their dream vacations were built on stolen ground. When the judge entered, the room fell silent. This was no longer about paperwork. This was about truth. The HOA's lead attorney opened first. He spoke confidently, pacing slowly like a performer on stage. He talked about vision. About community. About economic growth. About how their project had turned and used land into opportunity. He never once said my name. I was the claimant. The plaintiff. A problem, not a person. Then Daniel stood. He didn't walk around. He didn't raise his voice. He stood still. And said, "This case is simple. They built on land they did not own. And they knew it." The room shifted. He began showing timelines. Screens lit up. Maps overlapped. Deeds matched coordinates. Photos matched GPS data. He showed how every cabin sat inside my boundaries. Not close. Not partial. Completely. Then came the documents. The expired access agreement. The altered permit forms. The internal emails. The risky, but move fast message. I saw heads turn. People whisper. Lawyers shifting in their seats. One juror raised her eyebrows. The illusion was breaking. Witnesses were called. First, a former construction manager. He testified that he had concerns about ownership early on. He said he was told, "Don't worry. Legal handled it." Then a former HOA secretary. She admitted she never saw a valid agreement with me. She said approvals were rushed. Then came Richard. The president. The man who had smiled at me and walked away. He took the stand confidently at first. Straight back. Calm voice. Polished answers. Daniel started gently. "Did you know the access agreement had expired?" "No." "Did you verify ownership before approving construction?" "Our legal team did." "Did you ever contact Mr. Carter?" "No." "Why not?" He hesitated. I assumed it wasn't necessary. That hesitation echoed in the room. Daniel leaned in. "Because you already knew he hadn't approved. Correct?" Silence. Objection. Overruled. Richard swallowed. I believed we had sufficient documentation. Not I knew. Believed. Words matter in court. Then Daniel showed him the email. The one mentioning the island owner hasn't responded. Richard stared at it. His face changed. Color drained. He tried to explain. Tried to say it was out of context. Tried to blame subordinates. But it was too late. The truth was printed in black and white. One by one, their witnesses collapsed under questioning. Memories failed. Stories conflicted. Excuses contradicted documents. Meanwhile, Daniel called our experts. A land surveyor explained GPS boundaries. An engineer explained permanent structures. A zoning specialist explained violations. A financial analyst showed profits. Millions. Generated from my land. Without consent. Without lease. Without payment. When he finished, the courtroom was silent. Even the judge leaned forward. Then it was my turn. I didn't want to testify. Daniel advised against it. But I insisted. I wanted to speak. I took the stand. Swore the oath. And told my story. About buying the island. About escaping there. About watching strangers cut my trees. About being ignored. About years of silence. About studying laws at midnight. About believing in the system. My voice cracked once. I paused. Breathed. Continued. I looked at the jury and said, I didn't wait because I was weak. I waited because I trusted the truth. Some nodded. Some wiped their eyes. For the first time, I felt seen. Then came the bomb. During cross-examination, Daniel introduced a newly discovered document. A draft agreement. Prepared by the HOA's lawyers. Never signed. It offered me payment for use of my island. From years ago. They had tried to negotiate. I had never received it. Why? Because it was never sent. They chose the shortcut. They chose risk. They chose theft. The judge asked for a recess. When she returned, her face was different. Harder. Colder. She warned the defense about misleading the court. That warning alone told me everything. Their empire was cracking. And everyone could see it. That night, I sat alone on my dock. Listening to the water. Watching the lights. And for the first time in 3 years, I believed I might win. The courtroom had become a battlefield. Every day, more documents were revealed, more witnesses questioned, and the cracks in the HOA's story widened. By now, the board members and developers were exhausted. Their confident smiles were gone, replaced with nervous glances and forced politeness. You could feel it in the room, like a storm approaching. Every motion they filed, every objection they raised, felt weak. Desperate. And I watched quietly from the sidelines, knowing we had built something stronger than noise, stronger than money, stronger than their connections. We had proof. And proof is unstoppable. One afternoon, Daniel called me with urgency in his voice. "They're making a last-ditch effort," he said. "They want to settle. Offer a buyout. Try to take your silence in exchange for cash." I stared at him. My mind flashed to the cabins, the families renting them, the land that was mine. I thought about the 3 years of watching. The documentation. The strategy. And I said flatly, "No. I didn't wait this long to accept a handout. I want it back." He nodded, impressed but cautious. "Then we proceed. Full court. No compromise." That night, I returned to the island. The cabins stood tall, their lights glowing across the lake. I could hear laughter, music, even the soft hum of conversation. People enjoying the space as if it belonged to them. And in a way, it did, but only temporarily. Because every hammer strike, every wall, every dollar spent on construction would soon belong to me. I felt a mix of pride and anticipation. The calm before the storm, and I was ready. Court resumed the next day with tense energy. The HOA's legal team tried everything they could to delay the verdict. Requests for more documents. Demands for additional depositions. Even an attempt to challenge my credibility, claiming I had suddenly remembered issues that should have been addressed earlier. Daniel countered calmly, strategically, without raising his voice. Each attempt to distract or intimidate was countered with evidence, photographs, emails, financial statements, and witness testimony. Slowly, the room began to turn against them. Even the press noticed the shift. Stories about the private island dispute started appearing online. People were fascinated. They loved a David versus Goliath story. Then came the turning point. During one session, Daniel presented something that shook the entire courtroom. A financial report showing the income generated from every cabin since the day construction was completed. Profits, rental fees, and bookings were meticulously recorded. The total sum was staggering. Millions of dollars. And it had all been made on my land, without my permission. He didn't stop there. He connected the income to the expired access agreement and the fraudulent references in their permit applications. The judge, who had been quiet for days, leaned forward. The HOA lawyers' faces turned pale. This wasn't just about construction errors anymore. This was blatant profit from theft. Over the next few days, witness testimonies piled up. Former employees admitted under oath that they had doubts, but were instructed to follow orders. Contractors revealed miscommunications and unauthorized expansions. Even board members confessed that corners had been cut, approvals had been assumed, and risks taken deliberately. Every piece of testimony chipped away at the carefully constructed narrative that had allowed them to build 32 cabins on my island. I could feel the momentum swinging in our favor. The energy in the courtroom was electric. You could almost see the fear spreading like wildfire among the HOA team. But just when I thought we had the upper hand, they launched a desperate maneuver. Late one evening, my lawyer received an email from the HOA's lead counsel. They threatened a counterclaim, accusing me of harassment and interference with lawful business operations. They tried to portray me as the aggressor, the villain in their story. My stomach sank for a moment. The stakes were higher than ever. But Daniel reminded me to breathe. It's noise. Courts don't make decisions on threats. They make them on evidence. And we had mountains of it. The counterclaim was just another tactic, another weak attempt to scare me into submission. But fear was no longer part of my toolkit. Patience, preparation, and strategy were. The final week of trial arrived. My evidence, the documents, witness testimonies, financial reports, all had been presented. Now it was time for closing arguments. Daniel spoke with precision and passion. He reminded the court that I had been patient for 3 years, collecting proof while the HOA acted boldly, arrogantly, and unlawfully. He painted a picture of an individual wronged, of an island stolen, of profits earned at someone else's expense. He reminded the jury of the stakes, 32 cabins, millions of dollars, and a lifetime of memories. He didn't need to raise his voice. Every word landed like a hammer. Every sentence had weight. I could see it. Even the judge was attentive, eyes fixed on every word. Then it was the HOA's turn. They tried one last time to appear strong, confident, and untouchable. They spoke of community service, of economic development, of innocent mistakes. They begged the court to consider the bigger picture. But by then, their credibility had been shredded. The documents, the emails, the testimonies, all contradicted their words. Their empire was unraveling. And as they finished, I realized something extraordinary. We had survived the storm. And now, it was time for the final verdict. Outside the courtroom, reporters were waiting. Cameras flashed. Questions were asked. But I didn't answer. I stayed calm. I had learned over the last 3 years that patience, not reaction, was the most powerful weapon. The courtroom doors closed, and all we could do was wait. Every minute felt like an hour. Every second stretched endlessly. And then, after what felt like an eternity, the judge returned with her papers in hand. The room went silent. The air was thick with tension. My heart raced, but I didn't panic. I had seen the evidence. I had done the work. I had waited. And now, justice was about to speak. The courtroom was silent. Every pair of eyes was fixed on the judge as she adjusted her glasses and cleared her throat. My palms were sweaty, though I tried to hide it by gripping the edge of the bench. 32 cabins. Millions of dollars in profits. Years of planning, waiting, and watching. All of it came down to this moment. I had rehearsed nothing. I didn't need to. The truth was on our side. Evidence. Facts. Time itself. And yet, that moment felt like standing at the edge of a cliff before jumping, not knowing what awaited below. The judge began to speak. Slowly. Every word deliberate. She recapped the case, the evidence, the testimonies, the emails, the expired access agreement, the backdated approvals, the fraudulent assumptions. She didn't sugarcoat anything. She didn't minimize the seriousness of what the HOA had done. As she spoke, I could see the faces of their lawyers tighten. I could see the board members shift in their seats, whispering to each other, panic hidden behind forced calm. And then came the words I had been waiting 3 years to hear. It is the judgment of this court that the land in question, including all 32 cabins, belongs to the plaintiff, Mr. Carter. The defendants are ordered to transfer full ownership immediately and compensate the plaintiff for profits earned, legal fees, and damages incurred. Time seemed to stop. My heart thudded so loudly I could hear it in my ears. Relief, disbelief, joy, and vindication all collided in a single, overwhelming wave. I took a deep breath, letting it fill my lungs, feeling years of tension finally release. Around me, murmurs spread through the courtroom. The HOA board members' faces were pale, their mouths opening and closing like fish out of water. Their lawyers slumped in their seats. Some muttered under their breath, some stared blankly. Justice had been served, quietly but undeniably. The judge continued, outlining the logistics of transferring ownership and compensation. The cabins, the docks, the water systems, the solar panels, the rental contracts, all of it would legally become mine. The income generated over the last 3 years, stolen from my land, would be returned. They had to cover all legal costs. The magnitude of it made my mind spin. 32 cabins. Every single one. Built by people who thought I was weak. Taken because they assumed silence meant acceptance. But silence, as I had learned, can be a weapon if wielded with patience and precision. When the gavel finally came down, the sound echoed like thunder in the silent room. It wasn't just a sound, it was a release, a declaration that right had prevailed. I stood slowly, feeling every muscle in my body ache from tension and anticipation. For the first time in years, I smiled freely. Not just a small smile, but one that carried the weight of victory, strategy, patience, and justice. I looked across the room at the HOA president, Richard. He avoided my gaze. His confident demeanor was gone, replaced by shame, defeat, and disbelief. All the charm, the politeness, the threats, it had amounted to nothing. The next days were surreal. Lawyers coordinated the transfer of deeds. Cabin contracts were rewritten. Utility accounts changed names. What had been a source of frustration, anxiety, and rage was now a foundation for empowerment. I walked onto my island and looked around. The cabins, once symbols of theft and arrogance, now belonged to me. Every boardwalk, every solar panel, every tree carefully preserved within their construction became part of my vision. I didn't destroy them. I didn't evict people maliciously. I decided to honor the island's purpose, a place of peace, beauty, and enjoyment, but under the rightful ownership. Standing on the main dock that evening, I watched the sun set over the lake. The golden light reflected off the water and glinted through the windows of the cabins. I thought about the 3 years I had spent silently watching, planning, and preparing. Every argument, every piece of evidence, every sleepless night had led to this moment. I thought about the lesson I had learned: patience is not weakness. Observation is not passivity. Silence is not surrender. Sometimes the most powerful action is the one that is carefully calculated, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. I also thought about the people who had doubted me. Friends, neighbors, even some family members who told me to settle, to give up, to accept compensation. I didn't blame them. Most people don't understand the power of waiting. They want immediate results, instant reactions, and quick resolutions. But this island, these cabins, my property, they weren't for quick fixes. They were for justice. And justice, when truly served, is lasting. In the weeks that followed, I transformed the island. I renovated the cabins, kept their eco-friendly design, and turned them into a retreat that honored the natural beauty of the land. Every detail reflected careful thought and respect: solar panels, walking trails, quiet docks, and areas for meditation and reflection. I decided to rent them ethically, charging fair prices, giving people the chance to experience what I had cherished all these years. And the irony wasn't lost on me. The structures built illegally for profit were now part of a sustainable business that I could be proud of. But beyond the cabins and the profits, the greatest victory was intangible. It was the feeling of standing up when everyone told me to stay silent, of refusing to be intimidated by money, connections, or arrogance. It was knowing that integrity, patience, and meticulous preparation could topple an empire built on shortcuts and deceit. It was proof that even in a world where the powerful often try to override the powerless, a single determined person could reclaim what was theirs. I often think back to the day the first hammer struck my island, to the moment I saw concrete foundations where my trees once stood, to the silence I maintained while observing their every move. That silence was not weakness, it was strategy. Every photo, every note, every document collected during those years was a silent strike that built the foundation for the ultimate victory. And when the court finally ruled in my favor, it was more than a legal win, it was validation that patience, intelligence, and persistence always outmatch arrogance, greed, and impatience. Looking out over the lake now, the water calm, the cabins standing proudly, and the trees untouched, I feel a deep sense of peace. My island, my sanctuary, my life's work, it is mine. Not because I fought impulsively. Not because I shouted the loudest. But because I waited, I observed, I prepared, and I acted with precision when the time was right. Every cabin, every dock, every dollar earned illegally has been claimed, not out of revenge, but out of rightful justice. And in that justice, I found freedom. This story is more than about cabins, HOAs, or lakes. It's about resilience. About believing in what is yours. About understanding that silence is not always surrender and that patience is not weakness. Sometimes, the world will try to take from you, will act boldly while expecting you to yield. And sometimes, the right response is not immediate confrontation, but quiet preparation, strategic observation, and striking at the precise moment when truth and evidence align. And so, my island stands today, not just as a collection of cabins, but as a testament. A testament to patience, intelligence, and unwavering determination. 32 cabins. Millions of dollars. 3 years of silence. And a victory that was absolute, undeniable, and unforgettable. Because sometimes, the strongest voice is the one that waits, until the perfect moment to speak.